first step is waking up, which when I say that is really being embodied. So paying attention to the thoughts that are coming into your mind on a consistent basis, paying attention to what you feel in your body. Where is it? What does it feel like? Where is it coming from? What's coming up for you with that? And I think we live in a culture that loves to numb. We numb through, there's obvious numbing, substances, food, but there's also busyness. And there's so many ways to distract ourselves, social media, all these things. We love to numb and distract. And so if you can get still and really start to pay attention so you can wake up to what's going on for you under the surface, and then investigate that, get really curious about, why did I say that to myself? Where did that thought come from? Wow. Or why am I feeling this tightness in my chest? What's going on around me? Like, let me feel it. Let me let it in and experience that. So, because, our emotions are data. They're just trying to tell you something. They're trying to communicate maybe a need that hasn't been met that you can then meet, but you can only meet that need if you're aware of it and you know what it's trying to tell you. And so that would be the first step, is be. For me, the ultimate goal is to help my clients fully accept all of those aspects of themselves, to kind of fully integrate and just to be able to see, like, I'm worthy, even though I have all these messy little aspects of me. And I'm not just worthy when I show up as the highest version of myself, but I'm worthy no matter what with all of myself. And so really becoming who they were made to be at their authentic core, that for me is the goal. That is the ultimate success, because that's when, you feel free and life is really fulfilling, and you get to choose things based on what you actually desire and crave in your life, rather than based off what the world tells you you should want or you should be in order to be acceptable. Limiting beliefs are all over the place. And that's why if you pay attention to what you say, you can start to find, like, oh, interesting. That's one. Like, for instance, as simple as, like, if you wanted to set a goal to, wake up at 6 a.m. so you could incorporate one of these, methods or exercise to your day, but you're like, oh, I'm not a morning person. That's a belief and an identity that you have. And so automatically, if you don't start shifting that, I can tell you, you're not going to be successful long-term with waking up at 6. Either that, or you need to find a different time that's going to work that you believe you can stick with. Right. And so if you just start paying attention, I didn't do enough today. According to who? What standard are you setting? Like, start asking questions like that. For me, I'm clued in. I'm not enough. That's the, belief. I'm not enough. And if I'm not enough, if I'm inadequate, I'm not going to be lovable. I'm not going to belong. I'm going to be abandoned. And there we go. We get all the way to that root, and you can start to, and that sounds dramatic, but that's what's happening under the surface. And so you can start to pay attention. Why do I believe that? Because the thing with fear is it loves to keep you safe in the present. It wants to keep you alive in the present. But the day fear wins, tomorrow regret wins. And so that's what we have to remind ourselves is, like, fear is very, like, right now, very momentary, but regret is subtle and, down the line. And that is so much harder to hold than fear of right now. And so that's one thing I remind myself of. It's like, 10 years in the future, when that version of me looks back on this time right now, what do I want to see? What would I be proud of at this moment? And, usually I hate asking myself that, because I know it means I'm about to get pretty uncomfortable. But that has led me to so much growth and experiencing some really cool things in my life as a result of it. And so the more you can build up those experiences and that proof, I think the fear's still there. It never goes away, but the easier it is to trust yourself and know that, okay, I can overcome that. I'm stronger than that fear. At some point, you have to decide what kind of life you want to live. If you want to repeat what your current programming will have you repeat, which is what you grew up in, then that's fine. But if you don't, you're going to have to get uncomfortable and probably separate a little bit from, the way you were taught or raised to believe about that. And so that's, this work is really, there's so many aspects to it. It can be hard to, break down and explain, but what we do try to get to is what's the root of this belief? Where did you pick this up from? What did you need instead? And maybe what are some ways you're self-sabotaging to keep yourself safe? And how can we shift those, reintegrate some of those identities so that you do feel safe and worthy of having that, so that your actions, support that. You're no longer self-sabotaging. You're actually showing up for yourself and the things that you want in your life. When you love yourself well, you will be so much better able to love other people well and in a healthy way, and in a really beautiful, giving way, not just in a, I love you because it makes me feel a certain way. It makes me feel valued and like I have a purpose and like I'm safe. I love you just because I love you. I think that's what we all want, and we have to start by giving it to ourselves. No woman I work with is lazy and wants to do nothing at all. Like, we all have this energy to create and to do things that we care about. And so it's just so much more fulfilling when we can come from a place of, I'm full because I'm giving myself my own love. I'm in touch with my power. I know I'm enough, and heck yeah, let's see what I can do. I would just encourage anyone who wants to start with this level of self-love. I'd ask myself, okay, if I had, and try not to get in your head. A lot of people, when they talk about limiting beliefs, they're like, but my parents are great. I love them. I'm like, I love mine too. And you know what? Another human being is not going to be able to meet the need of another human being, no matter how amazing they are. We all are going to come up with limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging, trauma in a big sense and small sense usually. And so that's okay. Let's release the pressure. We're not blaming your parents. We're just trying to understand, what you need and where all these things came from. And so I would ask, if I were a mother or if I were a father, how might I treat myself today? What would I need? What do I need to hear from them? What kind of structure do I need to put in place so I show up really well, so I feel capable and like I'm believed in and like I can do these things and I'm cared for? And just kind of start brain dumping. Maybe here are some ideas for me. And that's where I would start, is just looking at what does love on an action base look like for you, and how can you start showing up for yourself in that way?
I just feel like your work, following you on Instagram literally alone, will set people free. The way that you write, the questions you ask, the journal prompts you give, the way you speak to the world with, I can't even put it in words. It's just like freeing to think of a life where you can let those things go so you can live in peace and not constantly be reacting out of fear. And so I'm just thankful the way that you write. I feel like you need to write a book now.
I'd love to.
And a lot of people are walking around saying, I don't know why this is happening to me. I feel like these certain things keep coming up, and the patterns of the trauma will continue to present itself until you have the capacity to deal with it.
What would you say to those people that are kind of just getting started to listening to their body? How can you kind of ease your way into understanding your body has a lot of information for you?
I think that the more that you can just have patience and grace with yourself as you step into that space, that's step one. Step two is go back to basics and simplicity, right? So finding the things that bring you back home to your body. I'm a big fan of doing an inventory of self and just sort of checking in, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. There's a lot of different ways that you can quiet the mind and that you can come back to presence and focus within yourself. But I think that one of the ways that really helps me is throughout the day, I'm always taking an inventory. How do I feel? What are my needs in this moment? Do I have a need for nourishment? Do I have a need for recuperation? Do I have a need for connection? Do I have a need for communicate, whatever it is, right? Am I meeting those basic needs? And a good resource for that is you can look into nonviolent communication. by Marshall Rosenberg. There's like, you can literally go onto the website. There's a list of needs and a list of emotions, right? And so you can look at our emotions are basically downstream effects or symptoms of needs that are either being met or not being met. You can meditate all you want. You can do all the yoga in the fucking world. You can do all the plant medicine ceremonies. You can do all the things. But if you don't actually know what your needs are and how to get your needs met, then you're not creating a sustainable structure for you moving forward within your growth anyway. So step 1 is having grace for yourself. Step 2 is starting to build some resources. So getting an understanding of how to do an inventory with yourself, how to check in, like, okay, my hips do feel a little bit tight today. Okay, well, why do they feel a little bit tight? Well, I did a 5-hour drive the other day. But being able to check in with yourself. So I think that sometimes meditation can be hard initially for people to step into that space of quieting the mind. I mean, perfect example for Brett. He created a program called Move, Breathe, Meditate. It's a great way to, like, you move your body first, then you breathe, then you lay down and things are quiet, right? So it's the same thing you see in yoga. You exhaust the body to a certain part of, physicality, and then you're able to utilize the breath to move through the body, and then you lay there and you soak it all in and you just let it fall away too. So I think if you're just getting started, it's going back to those simple basics of asking yourself, how am I today? What do I feel today? Where do I feel that in my body? And then how can I get that need met? So I think that when you're just starting, it's how can I go back to basics and have grace for myself and patience as I start to unwind some of the old habits and behaviors that I have.
I'm curious for you, when you think about a dysregulated nervous system, you say the state that you're in determines the story that your brain makes up. And so what does that mean? Because I have my ideas of what that means, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, I also want to just riff quickly on what you said about the slowing down. So healing is a feminine process. And the feminine requires us to soften, and it requires us to slow down and listen. So you can't supplement your way out of a lifestyle that you got yourself into, right? And the more that we continue to reach outside of ourselves and try to get into our hyper masculine, fix it, you're just continuing to pump the adrenals and pump the cortisol and like creating a stress environment for healing, when healing really means to sit back and listen and receive and be in the feminine way of what are the cycles of necessity that I have in my life, and how can I allow them to come forward from within me? Like you said, it's all inside of you.
And it was such a story of, do more. You're not doing enough. Therefore, you're hurting because you are slowing down. And so once that mindset shift happened, it was freedom. And that's what leads me to that question is like, how do we switch that story?
It's a lot of deconditioning, right? It's a lot of deconditioning of how our society has placed how we live our lives onto us rather than through us. And so it is kind of this coming back to the nature way of listening and the feminine way of listening and the healing way of listening. And that's why you see a lot more like women, coming forward and saying like, I don't want to keep doing things the way that we've been doing them. And women leading in different arenas in different ways and saying there's another way that we can do this. And I think that the way that we change the story around all of that is exactly like what you brought up too when I said, the state that you're in determines the story that your brain makes up. And if we're constantly in fight or flight all the time because we're stressed, we're overwhelmed, we're exhausted, we're overworked, we're looking for the next fucking thing that we have to do, we're never listening and we're never regulating and we're never sitting within the bandwidth of our tolerance of how we can actually integrate the experiences in our lives. So if you're in a high stress environment all the time, you're constantly in fight or flight, the way that you view the world, the perspective that you take on, the ways that you engage with other people, the ways that you engage with your food, with your conversation, with everything is totally different than if you're chilled out and you're more relaxed. Right? I think the easiest kind of, not to say that everybody needs to live in like vacation flow all the time, right? But imagine if your nervous system was in vacation flow more often. You're able to chill out and like listen and be present. So there is a slowing down again. And also the feminine doesn't necessarily mean that we don't, I mean, look at any mom, we get shit done. We just do it in a different rhythm. And so when I talk about the story that your brain makes up, right? It's like, if you look at it from a polyvagal standpoint, which again, the vagus nerve helps us regulate our nervous system, helps us, it travels from the brain into the gut, like it goes everywhere, right? And the way that we are able to understand our bandwidth, right? Like I'm good and I'm operating within this good bandwidth. If something pushes me too far out of my bandwidth, I'm going to be most likely in fight or flight, which majority of people are living in all the time. And healing doesn't happen there. And good decisions usually don't happen there. And so the more that we can regulate our nervous systems and come back into that good way with the bandwidth of like, okay, there's some challenges that are coming in, but I'm still in a regulated state where I'm resourced. I can figure out what I need to do. I can get my needs met within here. I can have good communication, and keep moving. The story that our brain is telling ourselves is one of I'm capable rather than I'm fucking overwhelmed. So again, if we're living in a resourced, regulated state, you're less likely to have reactive responses to things and you're more able to respond to things. I think that there's also this misperception in, again, like health and wellness and spirituality and self-growth, that it's like you have to be Zen all the time. And that's just not the way that the nervous system is built. And that's also just not the way that we're built as humans. One of the most beautiful things that we have to offer in this third dimensional reality, in this experience of being human, is the fact that we get to experience emotion. The fact that we get to experience the spectrum of emotion, the fact that we get to experience the dualities of emotion. And so you're meant to feel your feelings, and you can feel your feelings in a regulated state, right? So you can feel like, ooh, that kind of, that came up for me. And like, I'm feeling I feel a little angry about that. Let me be with anger. I can be with anger, but not let anger completely just like decompartmentalize me and have like all the pieces breaking apart. And then I'm just disintegrating into this like anger monster. Or I'm sad. Let me be with sadness. Let me understand what sadness feels like. Let me understand what are the resources that I need to experience sadness and also to move through sadness without having to push it to the side. So when we feel our emotions in a resourced space, it allows us, and within that bandwidth, right, where we're not dysregulated, we're not totally popping off into our trauma brain, we're not, shunting down into our lower brain centers and like going into fight or flight, or like dissociating and dysregulating ourselves. When we're able to feel our emotions in a regulated state, it allows for us to, again, provide those resources for being with them. I think that there's, again, this misconception that, a lot of people observe their emotions, but they don't feel them. They witness them, but they don't feel them. And if you don't feel it, then you don't understand the vibration and the tone of it. So you don't know how to move through it. Because it's almost like, okay, I'm trying to find something that I can pick up. It's like, okay, like here's my joy. Oh, look at, hey, Joy, see you over there. Or like, oh, here's my grief. I'm witnessing it. I see it. I know all the things and all the stuff to do to like see it and understand it and whatever, but I'm not actually ever feeling it and being with it. So when you're with it and you move through it, that provides you with the opportunity to still be regulated, not necessarily zen and calm through the entire thing, but resourced in the experience of it. And you're accessing more of your humanness by actually feeling your feelings, which leads you to healing whatever needs to be healed.
Can you give an example of what that really, I mean, as best as you can, feels like? Because I've heard, right, you have to feel to heal, and that awareness piece of being aware of it and everything you're saying. I'm like, yes, but no one's ever taught us how to feel the feels. I've heard like it takes 90 seconds for a feeling to move through you, but like really giving us what it's like to feel sad and let it move through us. What is that like? Or whatever emotion comes to mind.
Again, it comes down to questions. It comes down to inventory for me. I'm a big feeler. I know that I was like put on this planet to like help people understand their emotions, to figure out how to create good boundaries, to help lead them back to like their most powerful selves and like help them heal. Right. And I get that because it's like, I feel everything. So for me, it's just this very innate thing. So when I think about how like helping people into feeling their feelings, it comes down to what is the somatic or the body experience that you're having with the feeling. So one, the need comes up, and we'll kind of walk through a process. So like, say there's a need for communication that's not being met, right? Say there's a friend that you haven't had an important conversation with, and you need to be able to have the conversation with them. So my need for communication is not being met. I'm feeling disconnected, or maybe kind of pushed to the side, or unacknowledged. And to me, that feels like sort of dismissive, right? Or whatever it may be. So it's identifying the need, identifying the emotion. And then the next part of this is not just like, because that keeps us in our head, that keeps us in the mental realm, right? I know what the need is. I know what the emotion is. I'm identifying what it is. I'm observing it. I'm witnessing it. I've done all the things to kind of like categorize it and make it make sense in my like rational thinking brain. The next part of it is, I think, the most important piece, where we say, where does this live in my body? Because if we can somatically locate where it lives, we can feel what it feels like. So for me, like worry feels like a deep pit in my stomach. Like, oh. Anxiousness, I feel as a higher vibration. Here it kind of comes off my body, right? Sadness has like a sinking, collapsed feeling. It feels more hollow. I feel it like deeper behind my sternum. Joy feels really light and airy. So when we can start to identify the qualities of what the feeling feels like and where it lives within our body and where it wants to move, then I think that gives us a better access point of how we can actually feel it, right? So when something comes up for me, like anxiousness feels different than anger, then feels different than excitement. But I've sat with like, like this is coming up, like I feel kind of anxious about this. This is activating me in this way. I know that this, and this needs to get done, and my need for efficiency is not being met, and I'm feeling a little anxious, and that's feeling like it's right here. It's like, okay, well, let me be with anxiousness. I know what anxiousness feels like in my body. I know where it's living within my body. And now let me go to my resources of like, how do I move through this? For me, I'm like, I need to go outside and I need breath. So I've built the map. And when we can build our maps of what is the need? What is the emotion? Where does this live in my body? And what do I need to be present with in order to nurture my experience of experiencing this feeling so that I can move through it? Then we create a higher level of somatic emotional intelligence. We as women are so capable of so many things, and we have bandwidth that is so vast in so many ways. And we also have a tendency to put ourselves at the bottom of the list and put all these other things higher up on the list, and then wonder why we feel burnt out and we feel overwhelmed. I also had a client years ago where she was like, yeah, my intention for this year is like, I'm moving myself up the list. And I was like, I fucking love that. And so I think the more that we can identify, where in our lives do we need to maybe slow down? What are the things that we need to put down? What are the things that are not necessarily necessities for us? Or is this in the right timing? Does this need a pause? That's okay. Has this like event or this project or, this, tradition thing that we do, has it come to like a sense of completion? And do we need to give it a pause so that we can recalibrate as a family, or recalibrate as a couple, or recalibrate as an individual, or as a mother, whatever hat you're wearing, to say for what and for who? How am I showing up? And does this make sense? Because I think that's another thing that we just get conditioned into, is just go, 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 keep going. You committed to this thing, like you're doing this event and you're doing this other thing, and keep going, and like scale, and then add another thing, and all the stuff that you're like, why the fuck am I doing this? Like, hold on a second, let's pause. And if you're in that place and you're like, no, this is great, like this is actually what I've been calling in, I need to build the team. Okay, great. Build the team so that we can stay like moving forward in a good way, but also have the spaciousness that is required for us to enjoy it and not feel stressed out about it. And sometimes that takes being like, I'm going to put this down for a second so that I can figure out what it actually is.
Let's start with just defining boundaries and maybe why you're doing this work. What about boundaries is important?
Well, let's start with, I want you to think about boundaries as your own personal rules of engagement. It's basically a way that we let other people know what's okay with us and what is not okay with us. So your boundaries are comprised of your preferences, your limits, and your deal breakers, like the non-negotiables in your life. And it's not enough to just know those things, which many people don't even know, their preferences, their limits, and their deal breakers. But you must know them and have the ability to readily and clearly, transparently communicate them. So that's what they are, according to Terri Cole. Mm-hmm. Why they're important. Think about this, and you guys know because you've read the book. Your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers, they're not just that, they don't just make up your boundaries. Those qualities, they are who you are. So what happens is, if we are not asserting ourselves, telling the truth about how we feel or what we don't like or what really doesn't work for us, we are not letting the people in our lives know who we are actually, right? We're like playing a role because we want to keep the peace and we don't like conflict, or we don't want to fight with someone. But this is like institutionalized. We are trained. Most of us are raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents in life from childhood on. Was anyone not taught to be a good girl? Was anyone not taught to not be a troublemaker? Don't be a big mouth. Don't stir the pot. Be nice above all. I mean, I don't know, the way that I was raised, it was all about being nice was like this virtue above all others. And it really was about being perceived as nice. I don't want them to think I'm not nice. So I didn't say anything. So I said yes to do the thing, even though I don't want to do the thing. And when we really get down to it, and of course, I walk you guys through it in the book, saying yes when you want to say no. Like, is that legitimately being nice? Oh, it's not. It's just lying, right? It's not being nice. Because what happens is, if we continually do that, how do we end up feeling? Pissed, taken advantage of, like people are entitled. So instead of looking at our 50% of why we're doing all this crap we don't want to do, and overfunctioning and overgiving and overdoing, we then suddenly start projecting it out and being like, oh, Betty is entitled. I can't believe the nerve she has asking me. And here's the thing. Real life checkup tells us that people can and will ask us to do the most ridiculous shit. Like, they will listen, giver's going to give, taker's going to take. So when you're like, when is it enough? You know when it's enough? When you say it's enough. Mm-hmm. That's when it's enough. So we need to stop putting it on others and really get, what I teach you to do in this book is get really centered in your own self, knowing, raising your awareness about who you are, what you want, how you feel, and then teaching you how to have those boundary conversations, how to construct a boundary conversation, a boundary request, even with really difficult people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this book is written so well because it's like you help us see our issues in a way that's compassionate and like, you're not alone in this. Like, we are all guilty of doing this and we're all different. And you have a quiz too that you can take to see like kind of what are my tendencies? Because like you said,
yes, people can get that at boundaryquiz.com. Super easy.
Boundaryquiz.com.
13 questions.
Yeah, it's so great. And Brooke and I just took it and we are different. I am a powerhouse and she is a
pushover. And I was like, is this why we work? How is this going to happen? What's going to happen in the long term? You're just going to walk all over me?
Listen, two powerhouses, that would be tough.
Mm-hmm.
2 pushovers, that would be tough. So yeah, part of it is, but as you get healthier together, it'll work even better, right? So you don't end up feeling resentful when you're out of balance. Because think about it, when life is super easy and everything's going amazing, it's really not that hard to have decent boundaries because there's nothing to push up against. Mm-hmm. It's when we don't feel good, when life is hard, when we're trying to avoid conflict, when we don't want to have a hard conversation, when someone is trampling on the boundaries we have not yet expressed, right? Because a lot of times clients will say to me, this person in my office, they're a boundary bully. And I'm like, are they though? Like, tell me why. Oh, well, they just expect and they just assume and they're just entitled. And I'm like, okay. And when you said something to them about that, they're like, oh no, I haven't said anything. I'm like, right. So you're going to need to say something and give them the opportunity to perhaps respect your boundary that you can put in place with kindness, with ease, with grace. I think a really valuable thing we could talk about is the myths around being a boundary boss, because people have the wrong idea. They think if someone has really good boundaries, that they're a bully, that they're like my way or the highway, that they're like strong and aggressive. And no, that's just as dysfunctional as someone whose boundaries are too porous, right? Because we're talking about porous boundaries, which is more of the pushover or the peacekeeper. And then we have more rigid boundaries, which is can be the powerhouse, can be the loner, can be the ice queen. So there's different archetypes. But what we want is what's in the middle of those two things. So being too hard, that's just the other end, right? That's the pendulum swinging from being super loose to structured. And like if you're a powerhouse, you could be an amazing leader, like in life. But then when you're out of balance, you can be too bossy, you can be too controlling, you can like get up in other people's stuff, you can be codependent, right? You can really want to be controlling outcomes for others. And these are all the things that you learn about your own boundary style, because we are all so different that it's really important information. So boundaryquiz.com, go to it, people.
Our boundaries, or a lack thereof, are from our parents and our parents' parents, and these things that we have no control over. And you have to dig into your past, but you say you can't get stuck or blame or shame. And so let's kind of talk about how you do the deep dive in your past, but then not see, oh shit, this was so unfair, and to not get stuck there.
Well, here's the thing. We will be able to honor, right? If you're just starting to do your dive into your boundary blueprint. So first, let me just tell you what it is for those watching or listening. This is basically, I want you to think of it like a blueprint for a house that someone else designed. So the way that you relate to boundaries in your relationships, the way you relate to the greater world, how you relate to money, your job, your friends, all of those things, we had modeled behavior in the homes that we grew up in. Whether people did a good job of modeling behavior, whether they did a crappy job of modeling behavior, we learned a lot of what we think of as sort of the way the world is from other people. And so identifying, now I realize that, when I started really digging into my own boundary blueprint, I was like, oh, this is just the way it was for my mother. Mm-hmm. I don't have to be a people pleaser. Like, that's how it was for her. And so we internalize like, oh, this is what it means to be a woman, or a wife or a mother or whatever, right? It's what we see. And it doesn't matter if you weren't raised by biological parents, whatever adults influenced you in your life, you have some kind of unconscious, right? So that's where the basement is, information about how you're supposed to be in the world and how you're supposed to be in your relationships. This makes up your download a boundary blueprint. It also has to do with the country you live in, the culture, how they regard whatever gender you're identified with, how open or closed your family system was. All of us, like your boundary blueprint is as unique as your fingerprints. But it's important that we know what is in there, because once you realize, like, oh, I thought this was the way it was, as opposed to, oh, this is what I learned in my family of origin, but I can make a different choice. I can decide that it doesn't have to be that way for me. So it's not blaming necessarily, but here's the thing about not blaming. If you haven't done this work before, and if you had a chaotic family system, if there was abuse, if there was addiction, if there was, neglect, people falling asleep at the wheel, there is a part of you, the kid within you, has got to feel like they're being acknowledged, right? Of course, we don't want to get stuck there, but we can't bypass the reality of what we experienced as kids. Like we have to integrate it. We have to acknowledge it. We have to go, wow, that was really terrible. I was kind of on my own. My mother sort of disappeared when I turned 13. My parents were getting divorced. Like I fell into the hands of like hanging out with this much older woman, and, nothing too terrible happened, but there's still a reality. That was my experience. And I used to always, when I was younger, you always want to protect the adults in your life, right? As kids, we just want to be like, whatever, I know why. They had a hard childhood and they did better than their parents did. The little kid in you doesn't care at all. Like the little kid in you is like, I've been considering them above myself my entire effing life. Like, no, this process is about the truth. That was really hard to not have guidance at such an impressionable age. I'm grateful, right? What did it teach me? There are many good things. Our dysfunctional, right? Our dysfunctional childhoods, many times we get all of these adaptive skills that now, I knew how to make decisions and get stuff done and do all, because I had no choice but to do those things. So back to what you were saying about sort of not blaming, it's more about processing it so we don't stay in blame, but we must allow ourselves to have whatever feelings we have about any way that the parental impactors of your life let you down and failed you, because they did, because they all did. And if you're a parent, you're going to fail yours too in some way. I mean, this is just part of the human condition.
It's uncomfortable and painful to do this work, to think about setting boundaries and what are people going to say? I don't even know what boundaries to set. It's like you call the internal asshole committee. When you start to do this work, the thoughts that you have, it's like you want to numb because you don't want to hear the bitch in you keep talking. Like my internal asshole committee just screams at me. And I think getting in situations like drinking or doing things that necessarily we don't want to be doing, but we want to let loose and have fun. And then there's like the devil on your shoulder. Don't do this or don't do that. So I'm curious what your advice is for the internal asshole committee and how to be nicer to ourselves. Like, why are we so damn mean to ourselves?
Oh, so many good questions in there. Well, let's start with someone who says, I don't even know what boundaries I should have. And I'm overwhelmed, right? I will just, for that person, I'm just suggesting that you do a resentment inventory, because that will tell you immediately where a need is not being met, a boundary is being crossed. Maybe it's a boundary you haven't expressed, but if you're holding on to resentment, I'm going to say there's a really good possibility in that place where you're holding resentment for that person, a boundary is needed. So that would be a place for people who go, I have no idea. It's too overwhelming. No, it's not. Just do a resentment inventory and it'll tell you exactly where to start. So there's that. Back to the inner a-hole committee. So let's talk about this. Here's the thing. There's more than one reason why. Most of us have an inner a punitive or sort of harsh, judgy voice, right? That compares us to other people unfavorably. That's like, well, that's what you get for being an idiot, like, or whatever, like just mean things. And it's so interesting because when we think about that voice, I'll always say to my clients, well, would you say that to your 5-year-old niece who you love? Would you use that tone of voice and use those words? And she's like, obviously not. I'm like, right. So let's just make a rule. You need to talk to yourself as nicely and with as much kindness as you would your 5-year-old niece that you adore, because you deserve that. You are that 5-year-old kid. You are worthy of that compassion and consideration, especially your own. So looking at, could this be an internalized voice? Meaning a lot of times, if we had critical adults in our life, mean adults in our life, drunk adults in our life, neglectful adults in our life, we heard things. Someone might have said to you, well, your sister's the pretty one and you're the smart one. Now, some people would think that's a compliment, but of course, if you're a kid, you'd be like, wait a minute, I want to be the pretty and the smart one. What are you talking about? Or whatever. Then you have really mean parents who just say terrible things like you're ugly or you're stupid or I didn't want to have you or whatever. You weren't wanted. I mean, I can't. Being a therapist for 25 years, you just cannot believe how mean and dysfunctional some people are. And so when we're done living with those people, we have internalized that voice. So they stop doing it in real life because they don't have the same access. Well, we just pick up the ball. We just go, oh, now I hear that voice. We will hear that voice. So awareness is so key when we are shifting the scripts of that inner a-hole committee. Now we're going to make it be our inner friend committee, right? We're going to flip it into supportiveness, that looking at the inner a-holes, most of the time, fear-driven, ego-driven, and how I look at it and like to look at it is that they're trying to keep you safe. They don't want you to take a risk. They don't want something bad to happen. And even if they have to shame you into it or however they have to do it, it's so fear-based, all of that stuff. So rather than being like, shut the F up and sit the F down, which, there's that's a thought too. I think it's much more productive to integrate that fearful part and talk to that part like, hey, I know you're scared, but we're okay. Don't worry. Like, we don't let the inner committee, whatever they're saying, they cannot drive the van of your life. You cannot believe it. You must know that you are worthy. If you're confused about that, I want you to look at a baby picture of yourself. Look at that little face. You're going to tell me that little kid doesn't deserve everything, all the things, all the love, respect, adoration? They do. Oh, that little kid is you. You deserve all of those things right now in life. And so we start with ourselves, because really, when we think about how self-love comes into all of this, and I feel like people talk about self-love and you're like, ugh, it's so amorphous. What does it even mean? Just love yourself more. But that's not that helpful, I find. Self-love is really about the way we treat ourselves, right? Do we hold ourselves in high regard? Do we rest when we're tired? Or do we work ourselves to death? Do we not rest when we're tired? Do we overgive, overcommit? Are we hanging on by a thread because of all of this overfunctioning and people pleasing and all the crap that we're doing? Now, keep in mind how you relate to yourself sets the bar for every other relationship in your life. So if you hold yourself in high esteem, treat yourself with respect, kindness, compassion, care, rest when you're tired, don't overcommit, say no when you can't do something, give yourself permission to change your mind if you started something and you hate it, like all of those things, you will inevitably attract people who go, oh, that's how she is to be treated, how she's treating herself. That's how she is to be treated. And when we treat ourselves like crap, don't rest when we're tired, work ourselves to death, talk badly about ourselves, have all of this negative self-talk out there. We don't want to threaten other people, so we put ourselves down to be small so no one else feels threatened by us, all that stuff. What do? We attract someone else who agrees with that low self-assessment. So it really is incredibly important, if what we're seeking in life is to be respected and loved and considered, that we must first respect, love, and consider ourselves. And that will start the dominoes where now this is how you will be treated.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is why she is thriving all over the place, because holy shit, that was
so beautiful.
So beautiful. Can you make that an insight timer? And I can just, actually, it's fine. It'll be on Ivy Unleashed, and I'll just play that section every morning when I wake up. Through the work we've done and the guests we've had on, and it's just repeating, like, you being born is your key to having self-worth. Like, it is your inherent
value.
Yeah, your inherent
like,
value.
You do not need to, like I would say, like, look at babies, right? They don't need to like cook us dinner or like throw us a parade or like light themselves on fire for us to love them. Just by the sheer nature that they were born, we're like, oh my God, you're amazing. So you don't need to earn your value. You are inherently valued simply by the virtue of being alive. And it's really getting that and treating yourself. And, I walk you through it in the book, sort of step by step, because the self-care aspect of this book is a really big part of this book. It's in every single chapter, ideas and thoughts and exercises and things that you can do, because it is so lacking in the lives of most women in particular, where we're constantly prioritizing the thoughts, desires, needs of others above our own. And in doing so, we are depleted and exhausted. And then eventually, this leads directly to becoming a martyr in life, where you really feel like people owe you. You're like, after everything I've done for Betty, like literally, where you think now, you guys are young, you're like, that'll never be me. No. If we don't shift, and if we don't fill up our own bucket, and if we don't think we're worthy of taking a break, taking a vacation, people paying us back, getting paid overtime, all of the ways that we avoid conflict by abandoning ourselves, it just kills self-esteem. It just racks your self-esteem, because you're saying it's more important to keep the peace than for me to get what is owed me, or for me to be recognized for my work. Like, if we let someone sort of steal our idea or steal our work, and you feel embarrassed to say like, hey, that was my idea. No, it's learning that if you watch that happen and your best friend or your sister and someone was ripping off their idea right in front of your face, you'd be like, no way, Bob. No, that was Jane's idea. That wasn't you. Like, you would never be like, I don't want to have said Bob from accounting. You wouldn't care. You would stick up for that person that you love. So I'm just teaching you how to do all of that for yourself.